In the original Star Trek series, there was an episode in which something called an M5, which was a revolutionary computer that was created by Dr. Richard Daystrom, or is designed to handle. Basically, it was designed to handle all ship functions without human assistance. But it's thought to be an impressive achievement until M5 takes total control over the USS Enterprise and begins to attack other Federation ships. Captain Kirk tells Daystrom to disengage the M5 unit, but it proves to be impossible. But M5 has grown far more powerful and dangerous than anyone could have imagined, and the crew scrambles to shut it down. Reverse thrust will not engage, sir, said the chief engineer, Montgomery Scott. This is what he tells Kirk. Manual override isn't working either. But Mr. Spock, the first officer, chimes in, no effect on any of the M5 controls, Captain, and then the chief medical officer, Leonard McCoy, utters this line, fantastic machine, the M5, no off switch. In the wake of Donald Trump's insane conspiracy theory that his landslide election victory was stolen from him, which it wasn't, and in the aftermath of the violent siege in the Capitol, and with the arrival in the House of Representatives of a full-fledged QAnon supporter, the dumb cunt Marjorie Taylor Greene, many Republicans are unnerved by how radicalized our party has become after they spent nearly 5 years empowering and supporting Trump and Trumpism at best, looking the other way at worst, publicly defending Trump and cheering him on. It is belatedly dawning on more than a few Republicans that they risk being devoured by the forces they placed in control, and they are discovering to their horror that there's no off switch to this. Senate Minority Leader Moscow Mitch said earlier this week that Green's embrace of the lies and conspiracy theories is a cancer for the Republican Party. Oh yeah, but really, you're calling her out for her lies, but you never once called Pumpkin Tits out for his lies and conspiracy theories. McConnell is right, and I'm glad he spoke up. Yet for the entirety of the Trump presidency, with Trump peddling with Trump peddling one loony lie and a conspiracy theory after another, Moscow Mitch did nothing. And he didn't say anything about it either. And with a few exceptions like Senator Mitt Romney, no one else said or did anything either. They went along for the ride, some hoping to use Trump to advance policies they believed in, others gambling that sticking with Trump would enhance their power and the size of the party, and still others living in fear that anyone who stood up to Trump would be attacked and destroyed by him. But a party that defended Trump's every assault on decency and reality shouldn't be surprised when someone like Green, who not only has expressed support for the execution of Democratic leaders, but also had said that the Parkland and Sandy Hook school shootings were a false flag operation, and the worst wildlife in California history was caused by a space laser that might have been funded by the Rothschild Inc. The Clintons had John F. Kennedy, the Clintons had John F. Kennedy killed, and the former Democratic National Committee staffer Sethridge was murdered by MS-13, which Green described as the kind of henchman of the Obama administration, among other things, ends up in Congress somehow. She easily won her primary with the support of key Republicans, but not that it should be a surprise to anyone that, according to Green, Trump is still the most popular figure in the Republican Party, which he's not. But he called her on Saturday to express his backing. In other words, she basically said, I had a great call with my all-time favorite squatter. That was her words, the fat-ass Trump. I'm grateful for his support. Really, nobody would be grateful for his support. So how did the Republican Party end up in this dark place? It's complex, but surely part of the explanation rests at the base of the party, which today is composed of a significant number of people who are militant, inflamed, and tribalistic. They are populist, anti-institutional, and filled with grievances. They very nearly view politics as the war of all against all, and in far too many cases they have entered a world of make-believe. That doesn't describe the whole of the Republican Party's grassroots movement, of course, but it describes a disturbingly large portion of it, and Republicans who hope to rebuild the party will get nowhere unless and until they acknowledge this, why the base has become so radicalized as itself is becoming entangled in the story. The base's movement toward extremism preceded Trump, and inevitably complicated life for Republican lawmakers. They were understandably wary of speaking out in ways that would alienate their supporters, and that would catalyze a primary challenge, and might well cost them a general election. But that fear and reticence, in the age of Trump, a man willing to cross any line and violate any standard, and to dehumanize any opponent, produced a catastrophe. In some significant respects, the GOP is a party that has been morally inverted. Look at Liz Cheney, for example, who's a loyal Republican and member of the GOP House leadership. She voted to impeach Donald Trump for his role in inciting the mob that attacked the Capitol. But since that vote, there has been more outrage directed at her from the right-wing media ecosystem and local party activists than there has been over the crazed pronouncements of Marjorie Taylor Greene, dumb cunt, at home in Wyoming. The sense of betrayal toward Cheney among Republicans is burning hot at the moment, and Jeremy Peters of the New York Times reported Cheney ultimately survived a vote to strip her of her leadership position on Wednesday night, 145 to 65, and that it was a secret ballot, which allowed the House Republicans to vote for Cheney without having to go on record with their support. And it was undoubtedly one of the reasons the vote was so large in her favor. Republican lawmakers made a fundamental conceptual error in believing that their task was simply to reflect the views of their constituents, no matter how menacing, rather than, in the words of James Madison, to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them, and through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. A few years before Madison, and across the Atlantic, Edmund Burke, in his speech to the electors of Bristol, acknowledged that a lawmaker ought to put great weight in the opinions of his constituents and prefer their interest to his own. But his unbiased opinion, his mature judgment, his enlightened conscience, he ought not to sacrifice to you, but to any man or to any set of men living. Your representative owes you, and not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays instead of serving you. If he sacrifices it to your opinion, Burke ended his speech by saying, I shall ever use a respectful frankness of communication with you, your faithful friend, your devoted servant. I shall be to the end of my life a flatterer you do not wish for. But the mature judgment, enlightened consciousness, and the wisdom to discern the true interests of the country are not traits we saw from Republicans over the past half-decade. Instead, they saw their role as flatterers, as seismographers whose job was to stay in the good graces of constituents even when their constituents were allowing unfriendly passions to rule reason. They were afraid to speak truth to power, and in this case to the squatter Trump. They were afraid to speak truth to their constituents, and they bet they would take their safer paths for their careers, and the nation and their party would escape the damage. And they bet wrong. But the even more damaging error committed by Republicans, and not all, but most, was prying apart politics from the morality, viewing politics as simply as a means to gain and hold power. It was power for its own sake that mattered. In individual power, first and foremost, but also the party power. If principles collided with power, the former gave way to the latter. Basically, I'm not naive, but having spent my entire professional life, basically, I understand what it entails, the give and take, the balancing of ends and means with politics. But the fact that much of governing is prosaic and not involving matters of great moral import, I also understand human nature and how our motives are always tainted and never completely pure. But how a virtue courage is. But politics is a profession composed of flawed and fallen human beings, as all professions are. It is the byproduct of living in a fallen world. But there is a different, higher view of politics with which Republicans should acquaint themselves with. Few have articulated this view as beautifully as the Czech playwright and dissident Václav Havel, who became president of Czechoslovakia in 1989 and the newly created Czech Republic in 1993. In The Summer Mediterraneans, his first book as president, Havel offered the perspective of a person who, as a dissident, championed high ideals and principles, but as a practitioner of politics, he faced the immensely difficult task of putting those ideas and principles into practice. The question that he wrestled with himself is whether there was room for morality and a simple decency in politics, and did his ideals forged through decades of brave opposition to totalitarian have a place in public life? And Havel had readily acknowledged the challenges that were posed by what he called practical politics, but he answered that question unequivocally in the affirmative. Basically, he said, it is my responsibility to emphasize again and again the moral origin of all genuine politics, to stress the significance of moral values and standards in all spheres of social life, including economics, and to explain that if we don't try within ourselves to discover or rediscover or cultivate what I call higher responsibility, things will turn out very badly indeed for our country. He went on to say, it is not true that only the unfeeling cynic, the vain, the brash, and the vulgar can succeed in politics, but such people, it is true, are drawn to politics, but in the end, that decorum and good taste will always count for more. Basically, the experience and observations confirm that politics is the practice of morality as possible, and Hobble added this: anyone who claims that I am a dreamer who expects to transform hell into heaven is wrong. I have few illusions, but I feel a responsibility to work towards the things I consider good and right. I don't know whether I'll be able to change certain things for the better, or not at all. But both outcomes are possible, and there's only one thing that we will not concede, and that it might be meaningless to strive in a good cause. Um, Republicans can't erase the past 4 years, with rare exceptions that they were, to varying degrees, complicit in the Trump legacy, like the lies, the lawlessness, the brutality of our politics, the wounds to our country. But there is the opportunity for Republicans in the post-Trump era to forge a different path, one that again places morality at the center of politics, and the Republicans can choose to live with the truth rather than within the lie, to stand for simple decency, and to play a role in building a state that is reasonably humane and just. And this starts with its political leadership, which needs to break some terribly bad habits, including thinking one thing and saying another. It starts with the courage to confront the maliciousness in its ranks rather than to cater to it. I don't know if Republicans are up to the task right now, and I certainly will understand those who doubt it, but there are plenty of people willing to help them try. Even if a significant part of the party's base is not yet willing to let go of the ugliest and most toxic aspects of the American right, but though the Republican lawmakers should still take a stand, because there is honor in acting with integrity, and because it's better to live within the truth than within the lie, even though, especially if the lie is dominant in your community and in your church and your political party, and because it is never meaningless to strive in a good cause. But yep.